important in the context of the festivities in the month of October. Let me come down to the topic that is recent trends in socio-economic situation in South India. At the outset, my lecture from 10 to 11:15 is divided into two parts, phase one and phase two. And then in the second lecture, also I have two parts. In the first part, let me begin by making some broad macro points before coming to the exact topic. If we see India as a unit from many parameters, you can see fairly distinct identities between North and South India or the peninsular India. And this is because in North, whether it is Northeast or the Northwest, from Kashmir to Punjab to Rajasthan, has had different interaction with the neighboring countries or far off countries, which has impacted the society, the culture, religious trends, and the society economic conditions on the whole. Whereas in peninsular India, it has been a different sort of development altogether because of its insulation or isolation from most of the events which overtook North India, especially the invasions from the West, from Central Asia, from Persia, and also in the Northeast from neighboring areas. This apart, in the South, most of the languages, whether it is Tamil or Malayalam or Kannada or Telugu, are very old, ancient, classical languages which have survived and advanced over a period of hundreds and hundreds of years. Along with the languages which are well known in the peninsular or South India, literature also is vast and well recorded, whether it is poetry, prose, or various other aspects related to that. This advanced languages and literature speaks about the urbanization of the society and its advanced civilization. And the temples had been the seat of learning in most of the places in South India. They have contributed immensely for the spread and growth of education, both in the local vernacular languages and other languages which began to surface in South India. And these temples were led by very important religious leaders known as Shankaracharyas in different parts, known as mutts also in Karnataka particularly. So the religious leaders have been at the forefront of not only spreading education, but also providing facilities for students from various parts of the region and beyond. Along with the religious scholars, leaders who opened up temples and the neighboring associated places for as seats of learning, the rulers also patronized, encouraged, and supported education patronage for literature, poets, men of literature, so on and so forth. There is a long list of rulers from Cholas in Tamil Nadu or Cheras who moved to Kerala, the Rashtrakutas, the Chalukyas, the Hoysalas, the Ganga dynasty in Talakad, or the Vijayanagars and the various Rayas who ruled different parts of South India, coming down from Marathas, Tipu Sultan to the Wadiyas. So all these rulers have also shaped not only the progress of education or the urbanization of the area, but also brought about important socio-economic changes which were of far-reaching nature compared to other parts of India. So in South India, we had very visionary rulers, visionary religious leaders, not just during the Bhakti movement, but also throughout its recorded history. There has been smooth cooperation between the rulers and the religious figures, because of which there was rapid strides made in education and literature, culture, so on and so forth. This was possible mainly because of the sound economic foundations which were laid for a long time. And apart from vibrant internal trade, stretching from the Coromandel coast to the Malabar coast or beyond the Western Ghats, going towards the Vindhyas. The most important source of revenues for many of the rulers was the maritime trade. The Cholas particularly had extensive trade and maritime contacts with much of Southeast Asia, including up to China. So not only they exported items which were in abundance in South India, but also they established their empire stretching into many areas in present-day Southeast Asia, which is visible through the temples and the religious sites and various other cultural imprints which are available. And on the western side, through the Arabian Sea and the upper Indian Ocean region, the traders from the present day Tamil Nadu coast and the Kerala coast and the Konkan coast were in active trade relations with the Arabian Peninsula, stretching all the way to Egypt and the Roman Empire, which flourished. A place called Bernice on the Red Sea of the Egyptian coast was an important port center for Indian traders for a very long time, along with the Socotra Island, which belongs to Yemen. Then that place was Salalah, Aden in Oman and Yemen. So the Kerala coast has been in direct maritime trade. And this trade from both the sides of the Indian Peninsula area enriched the society and brought about rapid socio-economic changes for a long time, far ahead of other regions in a comparative perspective. If you visit Egypt, where I was there as a diplomat posted for about 4 years, I was wonderstruck to find that the temples the pharaohs built, they resemble very closely to what we have in South India, whether it is the Meenakshi temple in Madurai or at Rameshwaram or in Tirupati or Kadapa, Palani. or the temples in Kerala, or even the Hoysala built temples in Karnataka. So one wonders whether Indian artisans went there to build temples in Egypt, or the people from Egypt who came and helped the artists here in India. Similar is the situation in Southeast Asia also. So what I'm trying to highlight is this combination of rulers and religious leaders were the driving force for rapid socio-economic development in India before the emergence of the Europeans in the 15th century. So this society overall was dominated by religious leaders who worked closely with the monarchs, with the rulers, and perhaps the society was divided on caste lines also, which is visible in many situations. So on the whole, if you study up to 1500, the rich culture, the rich language, literature, urbanization, and the seeds of learning were too numerous in much of South India. And this speaks about prosperous society, prosperous trading community, not only in the coastal areas, but also in the interior parts because of agricultural land and monsoons and, unique ecosystem, which encourages the growth of spices, which were sought after all over the world. So, my own understanding is that the combination of good environment, good visionary leaders, and harmony in the society led to sound prosperity and the economic situation was fairly good until the arrival of Vasco da Gama in 1498 in Calicut in Kerala, who soon after Vasco da Gama's arrival, the Portuguese made extensive pillages, attacks on Indian ports from Kerala, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and also in the eastern coast. But primarily the west coast was their target because much of the spice trade and in textiles, this was playing a prominent role from the very beginning, from the Roman period itself. About 10 ports on the west coast and about 6 in the east coast, especially in South India, were the prominent ports which traded with Egypt, with Arabia, with Gulf, and the Magan civilization, which flourished in Oman, the Dilmun civilization, the Persian, and the Mesopotamian civilization. So, this interaction between South India and Southeast Asia and West Asia came to be ruptured once the Europeans found a direct sea route by the Portuguese, who took over much of the trade from Indian rulers, Indian traders, merchants, and those who did not submit to the Portuguese rule virtually, they were decimated, like foreign traders from the Arabs, from the Persians, from the Africans and Chinese, who made Indian coastal cities as what you find in Europe or America. Portuguese, this Vasco da Gama referred to Calicut uh, as the Lisbon of East, because everything was available in Calicut, and he found traders from all over the world, from the Arab world, from Persia, from Africans, Chinese, Southeast Asians, so on and so forth. He was astonished to find the city so rich in products and so diverse in terms of its uh, trading community. And this was because of the wise policy of the Zamorin, who was mainly interested in more revenue, along with Travancore rulers and other Nayaks who were appointed by the Vijayanagar rulers or the Cholas and their descendants in the eastern part. So the Europeans virtually destroyed the Indian ships, Indian merchant class, some of it which survived the onslaught of the Portuguese and other Europeans. They began to trade internally. So new routes were discovered to avoid the coastal areas or the Portuguese control of ports and harbors. So internal trade and many trading centers emerged through which most of the produce went to uh, North India, and from there through you know to Ottoman Empire and to Europe, so on and so forth. So the entry of the Europeans shook up the socio-economic situation in South India. And this was sustained for nearly 150 years until the Portuguese were driven out by the Omanis. The Omani sultans pursued the Portuguese. They expelled them from Oman, from Bahrain, from Bandar Abbas, from Hormuz, from East Africa. And throughout the Indian Ocean region, they were chased and they were confined to Goa. But the Portuguese were followed by the Dutch and the French, who tried to regain areas of trade contact and in the coastal areas, but without much success. It was only the British, because of their large ships and a huge navy, and their clever diplomacy, they were able to take over much of India through Bengal, through wars, through doctrine of lapse, through various other policies, and extend their rule to much of South India also. So the British used their presence in India, especially after 1857, the first freedom struggle, first war of independence, to use Indian material, Indian soldiers to occupy much of the Gulf region, from Kuwait to Iran, to Yemen, to Oman, Egypt, Sudan, Somalia, so on and so forth. And in the east also, they extended many colonies through Myanmar, Singapore, etc. So this entry of the Europeans created an upheaval, social upheaval, and many people in the coastal areas converted to Christianity. Uh, and this was for the first time a large scale conversion, which was earlier done after the rise of Islam, when many people converted to the new religion in the coastal areas, especially in Kerala, because of the stay of Arab traders who would stay for a few months on their way from Arabia to China for trade and with Southeast Asia also. So the new converts, especially from backward classes, brought about a new socio economic situation which the Europeans tried to manipulate to their advantage by granting them trade privileges as collaborators with the Europeans. So they were the privileged new group which emerged in the coastal areas with their own land and access to capital and trade and so on and so forth. Although trade by the Indian community, traders, Indian community from South India suffered because of this takeover by the Europeans, but still the inland trade continued because they produce the spices and textiles and others were still produced in large quantities in the hinterland. So the rulers also adapted to the situation from the loss of revenues and they turned inward and they adopted much more liberal policies which benefited other class of traders. In a way, the older class of traders suffered, but new class of traders and elites emerged under the patronage of the Europeans. But overall, it was sustaining the development levels which it had reached compared to the different parts of the region. The British, compared to other Europeans, they established a large number of colleges, universities, expanded railways, ports, medical institutions, and local rulers also made a reservation for other backward people in light with their vision of what they conceived as the society and the sharing of resources with other communities in the society. So overall, despite the onslaught of the Europeans and others, the socio-economic trends one notices up to India's independence in a positive way because the development of industries started by the local rulers was in a way sustained. The textile industries, although it was hit by development or import of cheap cotton and other fabrics from England, but nevertheless, the local industry also survived the onslaught of this British import of their products. So in that way, the blunt of successive attacks on the society and the economic situation in the South Indian region was able to sustain this onslaught because of the farsightedness of the rulers and the religious leaders also who took active part in the developmental aspect. You know, if you study the first hydropower installations in Karnataka, in Asia, perhaps, this was a kind of a breakthrough and linking the various internal cities with the railways. This brought about it accelerated the urbanization, which was already fairly high compared to the other parts of India. So South India forged ahead in terms of infrastructure development, whether it is roads or railways or ports, which were already in use for centuries. They were now used on a much larger scale. And the traders from the Arab countries also, despite European intrusion into the Gulf and Arabian Peninsula, they continue to operate with their ships, bringing horses, bringing dates, pearls from the Gulf region to the various horses, for example, were in great demand by the rulers in South India, or the pearls which were brought to Bombay, or dates which were in great demand. So these products continue to arrive despite restrictions by the British. And also the maritime connection between South India and Southeast Asia was sustained even by the Europeans, because they found the Indian uh, expertise, or Indian people who were spread across in much of Southeast Asia, from Myanmar to China, through Vietnam, through Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore. All of these places had Indians there who were already well established in trade, and also who were involved in educational institutions there. So the British and other Europeans, even the Portuguese, found the Indian presence there very useful in terms of internal trade or interland trade. So in that way, the South Indian presence in much of Southeast Asia further reinforced the economic connection, whether it was money lending or in trade and in insurance or various other financial aspects. The Indian community played an important role as a backup to the overall political military control by the Europeans, especially the British and the French and the Dutch to certain extent. On the western side, also, the trade, as I said, was lucrative. The Portuguese took over the horse trade from the Arabs. Much of the horse trade they took over, and the pearl trade also was there, benefiting many traders both in India and in the Gulf region. But after the development of artificial pearls in Japan, this trade fell, and it was a loss for livelihood, not only in terms of trade in Bombay, but also in the Coromandel coast and near the Sri Lankan coast, which was rich in pearls. These fell out of sight. So in that way, the Europeans, although they were exploitative, although they were plundering the wealth of India, especially South India, which is our focus of attention, but they also enriched and added to what was already a fairly developed socio-economic situation in South India. If you study the universities established by the British in Madras or Bombay, or the several colleges, missionary Christian colleges established all over the peninsular India, you can trace it to more than 150 years back. So these institutions have played a vital role in spreading education, in bringing backward classes also uh, into the universities, into the railway system, into the bureaucracy, into the port system, and various other local institutions. Many people benefited and were uplifted, and their socio-economic situation also improved considerably. Along with this was the healthcare system also. New type of healthcare measures were also introduced, both by the far-sighted Indian rulers, whether it is Wadiyars or the Rayans in different parts of South India, or even by the Europeans themselves, who tried to expand some of these facilities, institutions, which were in great demand in different parts of the country. One point about the linkage or bringing people within South India together on a large scale was the use of English language, especially from the second half of 19th century. This became an important link, and the establishment of institutions, educational institutions by the British further facilitated the society understanding and meeting of minds from different parts of South India. So it was easier to travel by train or the road system, which had greatly expanded, or even by transport by port from one port to the other. For example, there was regular travel between Bombay, Goa, and Kerala, and on the east also. So you had multiple ways where people could be mobile within India and in the coastal area, and all this benefited each other, and that is how the indicators of uh, change, advancement, modernization in the society uh, were quite visible. And this was because of combination of all of these factors, which I mentioned. That is the visionary leadership of the rulers, Indian local rulers, the religious leaders, Shankaracharyas, who were broad-minded, who were committed to the upliftment of the society, integration of the society, and involvement of the temples in various ways, not just in religion, but also in the socio-economic development, because they were also patronized by the rulers, because the rulers benefited immensely from the maritime trade from both the west coast and the east coast. And also, slowly, the Europeans also, whether it is French in Pondicherry or the Dutch in some enclaves on the west, or the British who were spread all along, or the Portuguese from Goa. All of these Europeans also added to their own facilities, which were modern, especially hospitals, educational institutions, and modernizing the overall society. It helped quite a lot in improving the socio-economic trends in the different parts of India, South India. I will take up the second phase after independence. What has been the trend in this field, in the socio-economic field? But if there are questions in this section, I would be very happy to take on the few points I have highlighted. Professor Guru Siddhaya, is that the pattern you are following, or we wait for the question?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, you are audible, sir, but Professor Gursidai is not there in online.
So what is the pattern? Is there a Q&A session, or that is in the second half?
No, that's depend upon you, sir.
No, I'm open for Q&A now. If there are questions, who is coordinating, let me know.
So the things, I'm one of the participants related to this. I'm Dr. Manyapalli Gundala, Assistant Professor from Northeastern Hill University, Meghalaya. So related to the South Indian history, where it was prosperous, as well as the temple structure and economic, and as well as the urbanism. By the faster, it's depend upon the scholars observing these things were fostered in the South India, especially by the maritime contacts. If that is the case, means where the Kerala had much contacts with Arabians, and why it was suddenly stopped at the time of early modern.
Yeah, you see, the trade which was quite active with Kerala, the Arabs were the principal traders. Up to 1498, as I mentioned, the Portuguese, as you know, were against the Zamarin, the ruler in Kerala, Calicut, giving privileges to the Arabs and the Persians. He was not in favor of allowing these traders because Portuguese wanted to control themselves the entire trade in spices and jewelry and various other products which were exported from Kerala. So that is how he bombarded Calicut, destroyed Calicut, which was a very prosperous city. It was called the Singapore of the East or the New York of the East. It was so rich uh, with so many traders, so many shops. Anything produced anywhere in the world you will find in Calicut. This is attested. This is confirmed by Vasco da Gama himself when he wrote a long letter to his king Emmanuel, Portuguese king, that Calicut is so rich that I have never seen such a rich port city in my lifetime. He acknowledged. So this richness, sought to be taken over by the Portuguese, and the decline of the Arabs, who were the main link between uh, Europeans and the Chinese, despite the Silk Road which existed, but maritime trade also was equally important. So the massacre of the Arab traders, the Persian traders, the burning of ships, both in Calicut or in West Coast and in the Arabian Peninsula, because most of the ports, whether it is Bahrain or Bushehr or Bandar Abbas or Hormuz, Muscat, Aden, Zanzibar, all of these ports were virtually destroyed by the Portuguese because the locals were not willing to hand over the trade facilities or ban the Arab traders from these port cities. So, in retaliation, the Portuguese virtually destroyed killed the Arab traders and their ships and their links. So, there was this decline of revenues for the local rulers, and trade was taken over. Not a ship, no Indian ship could build a ship for almost 300 years. And also, any Indian ruler who built the ship had to take the permission of the Portuguese to either send or import. So much was the restriction. So they strangulated the Indian trade and the Arabs were driven out of trade. Only few who managed to sneak through the iron control of the Portuguese and other European leaders were able to make it. But by and large, after 15th century, the trade benefits declined, and also you will see the decline of the Chola Empire and the Cheras and the Vijayanagar also, because most of the local empires, the Bahmanis also, they suffered because of the takeover by the Portuguese. And that's how most of the riches were transferred from India to Portugal to Spain and later on to Netherlands and to Paris and to the British subsequently by the East India Company. So the fruitful trade, lucrative trade, which Indians had with the Arabs, Persians, Chinese, Africans, and Southeast Asian people all was virtually decimated or taken over by the Europeans. And the maritime trade links suffered immensely because the ships were no more built by the local rulers who themselves became dependent on the Europeans. Earlier, before the Europeans came, these merchants had a huge number of ocean-going ships. The Zamorin had ships which would go all the way to present-day Kenya, Tanzania, even up to South Africa, or to Oman, or to Yemen. But because he refused to expel the Arab and other merchants, Chinese merchants, the Europeans attacked and destroyed their ships and didn't allow them to expand the maritime fleet. Same was the case in Gujarat also and all along the Maratha coast also. So all of these rulers, both in the east and in the west, immensely suffered because of the encroachment by the Europeans. And that is how, by 15th century, India was producing almost 24% of the global GDP. It was the second richest country in the world after China. Both China and India were producing almost 50% of the global output in all items needed by the rest of the world. So, by the entry of the Europeans, not only India suffered and began to be colonized, but China also is a victim of European colonialism and imperialism. And that is how the trade suffered and it impacted the society and the economic indicators. Otherwise, it would have been much more developed because the industries which were in India, which were supplying not just the spices or textiles, but also the finest jewelry was made in South India. Pattanam, place in Kerala or in present day Pondicherry or Kadalur or Tuticorin, all of these places were rich with blacksmiths, goldsmiths, and various other workers who were producing the finest products which were needed, and also subsequently silk products which were in great demand. So all of these suffered because of the European entry, and naturally the people in Kerala also suffered because of this, along with the coastal areas in the entire Andhra, Tamil Nadu, and Maratha,
Sir,
coast
I have
Karnataka.
one doubt regarding to this. While expressing every historian and the suddenly where the trade was declined or urbanism was declined, how we could say about the urban centers were totally depend upon only the trade activities, most over that external trade activities of a particular society, either the ancient or either the medieval, they are giving the same opinion.
No, most of the cities, urban centers in the coastal area were affected because this coastal trade was taken over by the Europeans from 1500 onwards. But as I said, many of the rulers who still survived, they carried on trade through the interior parts. That is how Srirangapatna, for example, that emerged near Mysore as an important trading center, or Kadapa, for example, in Andhra, or even Tirupati, or Aurangabad in Maharashtra, for example, Badami. Many interior parts which were not easily accessible by the Europeans. These internal cities also grew. Urbanization now moved inward. Earlier, it was confined to the coastal areas. Mostly, the coastal port cities developed. But because of this unexpected European encroachment, the rulers had to find ways and means to keep themselves in power and sustain the urbanization, which was the demand of the people who were there. They didn't want to suffer. So people from the coastal areas gradually migrated, including the traders who survived. They came to the interiors, and that's how many important trading centers in the interior came to be developed, and a good network of roads was established, and that sustained the export of these products, which were produced in spite of the inflicting of damage by the Europeans.
Sir, I have another one doubt. This is my last doubt. From ancient to up to the early medieval, entire the South India had a trade contacts with the Romans and the other world and Arabs and as well as up to the East Africa, Northeast Africa. But why the China was concentrated only the Silk Road? And for them, that was a very hard to cross the two deserts. After that, that was the long distance through all the difficulties they faced rather than choosing the ocean trade.
You see, Silk Road was much older than the maritime road. Although the Chinese were able to build large ships and they went up to Africa, but you see the hazards, the difficulties, and the risk for the ships was much greater. Due to uncertain monsoon conditions and cyclones and various other environmental factors. It was very difficult for ship owners to sustain the loss unless patronized by the rulers. Only the very rich rulers are in a position to have large fleet of ocean-going ships. And it was not so expensive, the caravan trade. Caravans would leave every day with goods from Xinjiang through present-day Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, all this Turkey, Afghanistan, right up to Mediterranean Sea. The present-day Lebanon, Izmir in Turkey, Gaza, Alexandria, these were the terminals where Silk Road products were finally unloaded to be further shipped to Europe. So all along this route, except one empire, that is the Ottoman Empire, it was desert and people were free to travel. There was not much of risk involved because the tribes or whoever was able to provide protection, and that was easy to seek because they had what they call sarais, resting places. If you have studied the Buddhist trading places, all of these resting places were innumerable, and those ultimately became the urban centers, small towns, cities, and in spite of Mongol invasion in the 13th century, when they destroyed the Abbasid Empire in Iraq, in Baghdad, local rulers were able, they benefited because the local rulers also imposed taxes, which was useful, but they were reasonable. They didn't want to prevent the loss of revenues. So they benefited from this trade because it was on such a huge scale, hundreds and thousands of camels, horses, carriages which were driven by people. They carried goods of all kinds from China or from present day Korea, Japan. or from India, from Kashmir, they had links, or from Northeast through Tibet. All of these produce, converged on this Silk Road, and that became the most profitable, lucrative, and cost-benefit analysis also. Whereas the ship route, was costly and it was subject to piracy. A lot of pirates would attack and they would loot ships and disappear. So in that way, they would go in the jungles of, say, present-day Indonesia or Southeast Asian jungles. It was difficult for the ship navigators to pursue them. They would attack and seize the cargo. So in that way, it was sporadic. The ships which would bring, but nevertheless, that also continued. But on a much larger scale was the land route, the Silk Route, which was beneficial.
Sir, I have one doubt. Where we used to say about economic exchange causes for the cultural exchange, which we find out from North India, it was a Gandhara influence, and South India, it was a Roman influence of Buddhist architecture. But the later period, when we will observe these kind of the things in the southern part of the India, even the southern part of Indian culture was expanded to the Northeast Asian countries, and how we could differentiate these kind of the things, and ancient India influenced by the Greeks and the Romans, and after that early medieval period of the India was extended up to the Southeast Asia, and either it was colonized, it was only the cultural expansion.
You see, the Buddhist culture was an pan-Indian. It started in North India and it spread to South India and to Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia. Whereas the Roman connection was almost exclusively with peninsular India, with South India. If you study the places where Roman coins have been found, it is mostly in South India. Most of the gold, silver, copper coins, recently in a place called Talakad, which is near Mysore, 3 or 4 pot full of Roman coins were found there. And this was the largest discovery of Roman coins, which means even a remote, small town like Talakad had very good trade relations with the Roman Empire, which was the case of Srirangapatna or Badami or other parts in Tamil Nadu or Kerala or even Andhra and Maharashtra. So the Roman connection was very strong with South India, whereas the Buddhist connection from north came only in some parts of South India. It did not spread to the entire South India because of the presence of Shankaracharyas, as I said, the mutts and the temples and the educational institutions which these religious leaders established, was a very significant factor here in pushing back the spread of Buddhism in the entire peninsular India. There were only pockets of Buddhist influence, but in North it was much more. And after a period of time, there also it declined and it remained only outside India. For example, in Southeast Asia, Buddhist influence remained there for a long time. Still, it exists there. Or Northeast through Tibet, China, Japan, Korea, or Central Asia. Much of Central Asia also was Buddhist, right up to Syria. The Kurdish people were Buddhist until they became Muslims in 7th century onwards. So the Buddhist connection with North India has been much stronger, much stable, and it has been sustained over a long period of time. And that is how it is differentiated with the Roman connection with South India, because much of the trade the Romans had was with South India, whereas North India was linked through the Buddhist centers to the Silk Road. So the contacts from, there were regular caravans from Agra going to the Silk Road to Isfahan every day, and through Kashmir, Kashgar, up to Kashgar, they would go. So the produce from India would go to all of these places where the sarais were established from the Ashokan period, from the Buddhist period. So we have to make a distinction between the North Indian trade centers and who dominated that trade, why India was so important link with the Silk Road, and why that could not be sustained in South India. And that is because of the unique geographical connections which South India had with the Southeast Asia or with East Asia through the until 7th century when the
Thank you, sir.
Arabs
Thank you.
took
Thank you.
over.
Sir, hello, sir.
Sir,
You have brought the relationship between maritime history and social history nicely. In this context, I would like to learn from you the contributions of Professor Sanjay Subramaniam to the maritime history of India, sir.
Yes, he is a very important scholar, Indian scholar, but mostly based in Europe and America. He has written outstanding books, especially on Portuguese trade and commerce, and also with a JNU professor on Persian trade and commerce in the background of European colonialism. He is unique in the sense he highlights the benefits, from Vasco da Gama onwards, how, in a way, he looks at it from his point of view positively, the contributions made some sectors by the Europeans, especially the Portuguese, uh, uh, in bringing new ideas, new products, new methodologies. His focus is mostly on the ship, uh, the huge iron-made ships, the flags, the forts, fortification, the Indian coastal port cities. These are his focus, not so much on the society and the inner socio-economic changes. His focus is mostly on the coastal areas. But there is one scholar from Kerala who was in JNU, Pius Melendikatal. He has written also on the Portuguese area, but from a socio-economic angle, he has thrown much light to his studies. Nevertheless, Sanjay is an outstanding scholar. His brother is now the External Affairs Minister, son of K. Subramaniam, the former IS officer, great man of strategy, who headed the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. He was Defense Secretary also in the Mrs. Gandhi's period in India.
Just a point to add, sir. Professor Pius Mallakandathil of JNU has contributed an important essay on the conversions of the Pariya community in Tuticorin area, pearl fishing area, which you are referring to in course of your lecture, sir.
Yes. Yes, I'm familiar with his work. In fact, I had invited him for a seminar. He presented a paper which is published in one of my edited book on India in the Gulf region, maritime trade, commerce, diaspora. I'm aware of his writings. He's a brilliant scholar. But after his retirement, when he left JNU, I think he is based somewhere in Kerala. He continues to inspire young scholars through his writings, through his lectures, so on and so forth. But his outstanding study is among communities there. Uh, he, of course, is an advocate of conversion and Christianity, especially Catholic religion, and he finds positive contribution from the Portuguese, etc., etc. That is his perspective, and that remains an important part of the scholarship on maritime trade and European uh, traders and how they transformed the coastal areas, transformed the backward communities who benefited from some of these European connections.
Thank you.
Sir, sir,
Yes.
The Portuguese and Arabs quarrel within Calicut, but Nambudiri or Zamorin was supported to Portuguese on one hand. Later, they were extended to Cochin because here they were particularly concentrated in what ground, sir?
You see, the Zamarin who wanted to have good relations with the Portuguese, right from Vasco da Gama time, Albuquerque, and others who followed him as governor generals. His main target was the expulsion of the Arab traders, whom he called Moors. Because, as you know, if you know, the Portuguese had a running battle with the Arabs in Spain, in Portugal, and then they extended this fight to Morocco and much of North Africa. So there was this continuous battle, fight between the Portuguese and the Arabs, whom they called as Moors. And when they found that the most important traders in Calicut and Zomarin were the Arabs, they were, that was their first demand from Zamorin, that the Zamorin should expel the Moors, because traders from Tunisia, from Morocco, from various other parts of the Arab world were already there, stationed in Calicut, exporting spices through what is known as Hormuz and Aden to that part of the world. And he was surprised to find the Tunisian traders who would speak Spanish language. So in that way, the Zamorin had to pay a very heavy price for supporting or inviting the Arab traders or the Persian traders or even the Chinese traders. Subsequently, the Zamorin went to Mecca and he converted to Islam, and he is buried near Salalah in present-day Oman. There is a place called Salalah where he is buried. But his successors, they had to accept some of the conditions. But gradually the Portuguese were given facilities by the rulers of Travancore and Kannur and other coastal areas, in Patkal, for example, or in Honavar, or they took over from the Bhavanese, Goa, Thane, and other places, or even the Adil Shahis, other parts of the western coast. So the Portuguese, did not like the idea of Arabs dominating the trade, spice trade between coastal Kerala or Karnataka with the Europeans, because they were the main link, middlemen between Europe and India, South India. because they would take spices in large quantities after bringing horses and dates from the Gulf area. So in that way, the Portuguese found ways and means to divert because of the attitude of Zamarin, who was in favor of the Arab traders.
Okay.
I can't hear you.
Okay. Is it audible, sir?
Now better.
Good morning, sir. I am Robert Rodriguez from St. Mary's College, Brahmava, Udupi, Karnataka. See, when you talk about trade and commerce, I think pearls, horses, these are the different commodities which were exchanged between continents or between the countries. What is the percentage or what is the role of slave trade, in or its impact on India in those days, sir? That is also a source of commodity for trade. What is your observation
Yes.
about it, sir?
Yeah, that is important because you see, most of the slaves in India were brought from present day Somalia. Somalia and an island called Zanzibar, which is in Tanzania, or even Nairobi, Dar es Salaam. These were the important points from where the Arabs brought initially, the Omanis particularly, they brought slaves which were in demand in India, not so much in the maritime trade, but for rulers who needed people to fight. They were mercenary soldiers because of their strength, because of their physique. These slaves were found useful uh, for security, for military purposes, and building of forts, so on and so forth. And one prominent group is the Siddhis, which is found all along the west coast, from Gujarat or even present day Sindh and Baluchistan. There they are called as Thattas. But in India, they are known as Siddhis. Some are Hindus, some are Muslims, some have converted to Christianity. But in Karnataka, I think they have been given scheduled tribe status. The coastal area. So, you see, these are African slaves who were mostly uh, in the coastal trade and commerce, and some went to the rulers, like, for example, in Aurangabad or in the Nizam. Or the Bijapur Sultan, or even during the Vijayanagar Empire, some of these people found themselves employed as horsemen in the cavalry because they were good in looking after horses, and many were assigned duties in this area. So these people still now retain their culture, their music, their dance, but they have adapted to local conditions. They speak Gujarati, Marathi, Konkani, or Kannada in some cases in Karnataka. Or the bunts, for example, in your area, or the Navayatis in Patkal on our area. These are very ancient traders who came from Mediterranean coast through the Gulf, through Persian coast, and they were in trade and commerce for a long time. Even now, some of them speak language which has a lot of Persian and Arabic. Some of these funds have now become backbone of banking and other trade and other professions. But basically, they were traders with the West Asian countries. They were the important link with the Roman Empire, for example. Uh, they facilitated trade. And there were some Jews also who were stationed in Cochin, in Bangalore, and other coastal areas. And their headquarters was in Cairo, who financed the trade So some of these people who came from different parts of the world or from different port cities of the world which were existing, they have become part and parcel of the Indian society, and they have brought their own culture, their own traditions, customs, which are now part the coastal port cities culture. So in that way, it has enriched the peninsular India's links. That explains, large number of people from coastal areas going to the Gulf now. Majority of the 9 million people are from Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Konkan, Gujarat, and Maharashtra. Who are gainfully employed and who send about almost $50+ billion in foreign exchange for the country, and who are doing a superb job in the economic development of all of these countries. And also, people are in large number in East Africa also. That has been a major link because the Arabs used to come from Kuwait through Bahrain, through Oman to Gujarat, unload the cargo of dates and horses. From there, they would pick up salt. They would bring to Kerala and Mangalore. And from there, they would take the tiles to East Africa. And from East Africa, they would take timber through Yemen, through Oman, to Kuwait, and to Central Asia, for the building purposes. So the best of teakwood and timber was taken through this long route by the Arab ship builders for a long time.